Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters. I'm your host Mitch, glad to have you here. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about Commander on a budget. Today's episode is going to be a $50 deck tech. When I say $50, I mean that is an overall deck cost. Both shipping and commanders that are $10 or less are going to be included in that cost, but basic lands will not be. Decks on this channel are built to be fun, inexpensive, and focused. If you want to learn more about what a focused commander deck is, check out this video here. On this deck tech, I'm going to take you through its strategy, the tactics, and how this deck wins. This show and episodes like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. If you're looking for an easy way to help support this show, make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. Also, hit that bell notification icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And while you're at it, subscribe and review our podcast as well. You can also go check out our playmats and other merchandise at thecommandersquarters.com. Another easy way to support this show is with our TCGplayer affiliate links. So whether you're buying a deck or individual cards, you can use this general link right here or one in the description. And the final way that you can support this show is by supporting us directly by becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, and I truly couldn't do this without all of their support. So on some recent episodes, I talked about creatures that should be legendary for one reason or another. And one of those creatures that the community really seemed to agree with was Tamanoa. So even though Tamanoa is not legendary, I thought it'd be fun to do a deck tech on it. But please keep in mind that Tamanoa is not legendary and therefore is not a legal commander. This doesn't mean that you can't build and play with a Tamanoa deck, you just need to ask your playgroup first. If they're okay with it, then go for it. If not, that's okay too. Anyways, Tamanoa is a 2/4 spirit that costs red, green, white. It has whenever a non-creature source you control deals damage, you gain that much life. So a somewhat similar commander to this might be Firesong and Sunspeaker. The main difference being though that Firesong and Sunspeaker only counts red instant and sorcery spells. In contrast, Tamanoa counts all non-creature sources including artifacts and enchantments. Because of that, you've got a lot more options on how you might want to build this deck. Personally, I think the best direction for this deck is a group slug build. Group slug decks essentially want to watch the world burn and hope that they're the last one standing. So they're going to have a lot of continuous damage effects that hurt everyone. The main difference being that with Tamanoa in play, we're actually going to be gaining life for all the damage that we're dealing. This can help us stay well ahead of our opponents and burn them out. So what's our strategy for this deck? Well, we're going to damage everyone and everything over and over again. As long as we're using non-creature sources, we're going to be gaining life every single time we do so. And then how do we win with this deck? We're going to outlast everyone and burn them all to the ground. Again, because of that life gain, we'll be able to outlast our opponents, but they're not going to be so lucky. As with all Commander's Quarters decks, I'm going to take you through 10 different tactics that show you how the deck works and how we're going to win with it. So let's start things off with tack number 1, ramping up. First up, there's Wayfarer's Bauble, which we can pay 2 and tap and sacrifice to get a basic land into play tapped. Next up, we've got Farseek, which is going to get us either a Plains or a Mountain into play tapped. And then Rampant Growth and Edge of Autumn will get us any basic into play tapped. Next up, we're running all 3 of our Signets with Gruul, Boros, and Selesnya. And then we've got 2 of our Talismans with Talisman of Impulse and Talisman of Conviction. Then we're running Search for Tomorrow, which can get us 1 basic into play untapped, and it's got Suspend 2 for a green. And finally, we've got Grow from the Ashes, which can get us 1 basic into play untapped or 2 if we kicked it. But after we've ramped and fixed our mana, what's next? Let's find out in tactic number 2, keep up. First up, there's Barbed Wire, which says at the beginning of each player's upkeep, Barbed Wire deals 1 damage to that player. It also gives us the ability to pay to prevent damage, but we're probably never going to do that. Because when it deals damage to us, we're just going to gain that life back anyways. Next up, running Ancient Ruins, which says at the beginning of each player's upkeep, Ancient Ruins deals damage to that player equal to the number of artifacts they control. So for some decks, this might not be too much, but for others, it can be extremely deadly. Next up, there's Collapsing Borders, which says at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player gains 1 life for each basic land type among lands they control, then Collapsing Borders deals 3 damage to that player. So most decks are going to gain less life than the damage that they take. And also, with just 1 trip around the table, we're going to be gaining 9 life from this. And finally, there's Primal Order, which says at the beginning of each player's upkeep, Primal Order deals damage to that player equal to the number of non-basic lands they control. So against the vast majority of decks, this is going to deal a ton of damage throughout the game. But we've got some more ways to deal consistent damage as well. So let's move on to tactic number 3, wrong answer. First up, there's Burning Earth, which says whenever a player taps a non-basic land for mana, Burning Earth deals 1 damage to that player. Mana Barbs takes this a step further because it deals 1 damage for any land that they tap. And same thing with Overabundance, which also doubles up mana from those lands. Next, we've got some cards that punish players for casting spells with Pyrostatic Pillar and Spell Shock. Pyrostatic Pillar says whenever a player casts a spell with converted mana cost 3 or less, Pyrostatic Pillar deals 2 damage to that player. And then Spell Shock deals 2 damage no matter what spell they cast. And then we've got some cards that punish players based on their hand size with Wheel of Torture, Skull Cage, and Iron Maiden. Wheel of Torture says at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, Wheel of Torture deals X damage to that player where X is 3 minus the number of cards in their hand. Skull Cage says at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, Skull Cage deals 2 damage to that player unless he or she has exactly 3 cards or exactly 4 cards in their hand. And then Iron Maiden says at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, Iron Maiden deals X damage to that player where X is the number of cards in their hand minus 4. And finally, there's Dingus Staff, which punishes players for their creatures dying. It says whenever a creature dies, Dingus Staff deals 2 damage to that creature's controller. Our deck is definitely not centered on creatures, but plenty of others are. But we've also got some ways to make our damage even more impactful. So now let's move on to tactic number 4, double the fun. First up, there's Dictate the Twin Gods, which has flash and says if a source would deal damage to a permanent or player, deals double that damage to that permanent or player instead. With an effect like this, we're going to be dealing out twice as much damage and gaining twice as much life. Yes, this is going to double up our opponent's damage as well, but with this kind of a deck, it's going to benefit us more. But we've also got a more targeted effect like Curse of Bloodletting. It has Enchant Player, and if a source would deal damage to Enchanted Player, it deals double that damage to that player instead. So with this, we can target one player to take them down even faster. And similarly, we're also running Bitter Feud. As it enters the battlefield, you choose 2 players, and if a source controlled by one of the chosen players would deal damage to the other chosen player or a permanent that player controls, that source deals double that damage to that permanent or player instead. So essentially for this deck, we want to choose ourselves and one of our opponents. Yes, they're going to deal twice as much damage to us, but we also deal twice as much damage to them. And again, this deck is pretty much guaranteed to have a lot more ways to deal out that damage than they do. So let's go through some more ways to deal out some damage in our next tactic. And that would be tactic number 5, Trial by Fire. First up, there's Circle of Flame, which says whenever a creature without flying attacks you or a planeswalker you control, Circle of Flame deals 1 damage to that creature. So essentially, if someone tries to attack us with some ground creatures, we're going to be dealing out some damage and gaining some life back. Then Caltrops is even better because it says whenever a creature attacks, Caltrops deals 1 damage to it. So no matter what creature's attacking and whoever they attack, we're going to be dealing out damage and gaining life. An even bigger effect comes from Power Stone Minefield, which says whenever a creature attacks or blocks, Power Stone Minefield deals 2 damage to it. This is going to deal out a ton of damage and gain us a lot of life throughout the game. Next up, there's Light Minefield, which is a fantastic way to protect ourselves and deal out a ton of damage. It says whenever one or more creatures attack, Light Minefield deals damage to each of those creatures equal to the number of attacking creatures. And finally, there's Aether Flash, which says whenever a creature comes into play, Aether Flash deals 2 damage to it. So whether our opponents are attacking, blocking, or just playing their creatures, we've got plenty of ways to deal damage to them. But we're not quite done with our damage and benefits from damage just yet. So let's go over some more cards in tactic number 6, Burning It Down. First up, there's Searing Meditation, which says whenever you gain life, you may pay 2. If you do, Searing Meditation deals 2 damage to our creature or player. So basically, we can just keep activating this over and over again as long as we've got extra mana. When it deals damage, we gain life and then we can activate it again. Another way to gain value from gaining life is with Angelic Accord. It says at the beginning of each end step, if you gain 4 or more life this turn, create a 4/4 white angel creature token with flying. So with this deck, we're pretty much going to be getting an angel each and every single turn. And as valuable as that might be, we've got a card in this deck that is even better. And that's going to be our golden pick of the deck, which is our number 1 card out of our 99. And the golden pick for this deck is Pyrohemia. It's an enchantment for 2 red and says at the beginning of the end step, if there are no creatures on the battlefield, sacrifice Pyrohemia. And then by paying a red, Pyrohemia deals 1 damage to each creature and each player. This singular card can deal out a ton of damage throughout the game, gaining us an incredible amount of life. Each time that we activate it, we essentially gain 1 life for each of our opponents and each creature on the battlefield. And that's just for 1 mana each time. As long as there's 1 creature on the battlefield, this is going to stick around and we can keep activating it over and over again. Now, of course, that means that we can only activate this 3 times in a turn or Tamanoa is going to die. But there are definitely some ways around that as well. So now it's time for us to move on to tactic number 7, Safety First. First up, there's Magebane Armor, which says equipped creature gets +2/+4 and loses flying, prevent all non-combat damage that we dealt to equipped creature. So with this on Tamanoa, our damage effects like Pyrohemia won't affect her and we can keep using them if we want to. A similar effect comes from Light of Sanction, which says prevent all damage that we dealt to creatures you control by sources you control. Next up, there's Mask of Long Grace, which says enchanted creature has protection from black and from red. So this can protect Tamanoa from some of our things as well as our opponents as well. And then there's Regeneration, which lets us regenerate it for just a green. Indestructibility is even better because it says enchanted permanent has indestructible. And finally, we've got some ways to protect Tamanoa or one of our other permanents with Face Shield and Razor Barrier. Face Shield says target permanent you control gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn, and it's got Fateful Hour, so if you've got 5 or less life, instead you and each permanent you control gain protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. And then Razor Barrier says target permanent you control gains protection from artifacts or from the color of your choice until end of turn. So essentially these connect as counterspells against targeted removal. And speaking of targeted removal, let's move on to our next tactic. And that's going to be tactic number 8, Out With You. First up, we've got Return to Nature, which says choose 1, destroy target artifact, destroy target enchantment, or exile target card from a graveyard. Next up, there's Crush Contraband, which says choose 1 or both, exile target artifact, exile target enchantment. And finally, there's Oblation, which says the owner of target non-land permanent shuffles it into their library, then draws 2 cards. And sometimes this actually might be beneficial for us to cast on one of our own things to draw some cards. But what about some other ways for us to draw? Let's go through some now in tactic number 9, ups and downs. First up, there's Tormenting Voice, which says as an additional cost to cast this spell, discard a card, draw 2 cards. Throw Possibility does the exact same thing except at instant speed. And then Cathartic Reunion makes us discard 2 to draw 3. Next up, there's Corvus Fury, which says for each player choose friend or foe. Each friend discards all the cards from their hand and draws that many cards +1. Corvus Fury deals damage to each foe equal to the number of cards in their hand. So this not only helps us wheel, but it's also going to deal some damage to our opponents. And then we're running Harmonize, which is a simple draw spell. It just says draw 3 cards. Next up, we've got 2 ways to draw cards that benefit from life gain with Dawn of Hope and Well of Lost Dreams. Dawn of Hope says whenever you gain life, you may pay 2. If you do, draw a card. And then Well of Lost Dreams says whenever you gain life, you may pay X, where X is less than or equal to the amount of life you gained. If you do, draw X cards. Both these can be fantastic sources of draw throughout the game with this deck. Next up, we've got Book of Wrath and Lore Seeker Stone. Book of Wrath has 2, pay 2 life, draw a card. And Lore Seeker Stone has pay 3 and tap it to draw 3 cards. This ability costs 1 more to activate for each card in your hand. And finally, we've got some recursion spells with Regrowth and Reap the Past. Regrowth says return target card from your graveyard to your hand. And then Reap the Past says return X cards at random from your graveyard to your hand, exile Reap the Past. One of those cards that we get back might just be one of our big damage spells. So let's go over those now in tactic number 10, Blaze of Glory. First up, there's Mizzium Mortars, which says Mizzium Mortars deals 4 damage to target creature you don't control, and it's got Overload for 3 red, red, red. And then there's Chain Reaction, which deals X damage to each creature, where X is the number of creatures on the battlefield. Next up, there's Starstorm, which is going to deal X damage to each creature, and we can cycle it for 3. And then there's Earthquake, which is going to deal X damage to each creature without flying and each player. Next up, we've got Incite Rebellion, which says for each player, Incite Rebellion deals damage to that player and each creature that player controls equal to the number of creatures they control. And finally, we've got 2 cards that can keep Tamanoa safe and deal out a ton of damage to our opponents with Hurricane and Squall Line. They both are going to deal X damage to each creature with flying and each player. The amount of damage that this deck can deal out and the life that it can gain is pretty ridiculous. But again, please make sure that you ask the players in your playgroup or those at your LGS before you go ahead and build it. But now that we've gone through the spells in this deck, let's go on to the mana base. First up, we've got Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse, both of which we can tap and sacrifice to get a base land into play tapped. Next up, we're running one of the Panoramas with Naya Panorama. Then we've got 5 lands that come into play tapped and tap for either a red or green mana. Next up, we've got 4 lands that come into play tapped and tap for either a green or white mana. And then we've got 3 lands that come into play tapped and tap for either a red or white mana. Next up, there's Jungle Shrine, which comes into play tapped and taps for any of our colors. And then we're running 2 of the Vivid lands with Vivid Crag and Vivid Grove. Finally, we're running 18 basic lands. 8 of those are going to be a mountain, 6 will be a forest, and 4 will be a plains. And now that we've gone through every single card in this deck, let's do a quick price check. A quick reminder that our deck costs are calculated using TCGplayer optimization, optimizing with even heavily played and damaged cards because those cards need a home too. There actually is no EDH rec average deck price for Tamanoa because it's not a legendary creature. But if there was, I imagine that our deck would be cheaper at $49.85. Again, the price of this deck is the price that I got for it on the day that I'm recording. If you want to see a breakdown of this deck's cost, check out the link in the description. Keep in mind that prices can and will fluctuate and change over time. But with these deck costs, I want to be as transparent as I possibly can. Again, Commander's Quarters decks are about to be tuned and focused within their budget, but there are always ways that we can improve on them. So let's go through some reasonable upgrades now to see what some of those ways just might be. First up, let's add in Darksteel Plate by taking out Regeneration. Next up, let's add in Gratuitous Violence by taking out Bitter Feud. And then let's add in Furnace of Wrath by taking out Wheel of Torture. Next up, let's add in Ankh of Mishra by taking out Starstorm. And then we're adding in Ghostly Prism by taking out Circle of Flame. Finally, let's add in Sphere of Safety by taking out Searing Meditation. And now it's my turn to hear from you. So in the comments below, let me know what you think about this deck and what you think about the Commander in general. And make sure you're following us on social media for more updates and sneak peeks on future episodes. Again, a huge thank you to my patrons who help make this show possible. I truly couldn't do any of this without your support. If you want to support this channel directly, consider becoming a patron. There are many benefits to being a patron, including being able to vote on future commanders for deck tags. There are even tiers where you get your own personalized deck tag dedicated to you. You can check out all the Patreon tiers and rewards at patreon.com/commandersquarters. If you haven't already, make sure that you like and subscribe to the channel. Here at the Commander's Quarters, we're all about budget Commander. So while you're at it, go ahead and check out some of our other types of episodes. And with that, I'm out of here. Thanks again and have a good one.